So before I start this video, I thought I would talk a little bit about plants. Just kind of running over some of the basics when you're choosing plants for your garden, or specifically for this video, planters. So when you're choosing plants, the first thing to consider is the amount of sunlight, whether they're in a garden or in a container. Making sure you choose plants for that specific amount of sunlight is very important, because if you put a shade plant in the sun, it won't do as well and thrive like a sun plant would. And it's easy to tell which plants are for sun or shade, because at most greenhouses, all the plants have little tags, and they will tell you on the tags how much light the plants prefer. The other thing that I look at is bloom time. In greenhouses in the spring, greenhouses are notorious for selling plants that bloom only in the spring, and they'll be blooming beautifully when you're, a lot of times, they'll be blooming beautifully when you are in the greenhouse. But after you take them home, plant them in your containers or garden, you might notice, like, oh, you know, in a couple weeks or even a week, maybe they're already done blooming. So make sure to do your research and choose plants that, if you prefer, because I like it when the plants bloom throughout the season. So I try to choose things that are not just spring blooming plants. When I'm choosing the plants for the planters, there's many different styles of planters that you can make, of course, but what I usually try to do is I choose at least one plant for height. For this planter that I'm doing today, I chose calla lily and an ornamental grass, because I wanted height, but I also wanted some texture in the planter too. So the other type of thing that I'm looking for when I'm choosing plants for a planter is I want something usually that blooms, and I also want something that overflows. So that way, when you're looking at this planter, I feel like it makes a well-balanced planter if you have something that's tall, something that adds some interesting texture, something that blooms, and something that overflows. So, you know, some plants might cover both of those. Like, for instance, there's a flowering plant that I chose for this planter that blooms and also will overflow the planter. So that one kind of does both. So another thing just to point out about planters, when you first plant them, they most likely will not look finished. So don't choose plants based off of how big they are in the greenhouse necessarily, because a lot of plants look small when you first buy them, but they get huge. And then some plants look fairly large compared to all these small ones, but that's about as big as they'll get. So really look at the heights, because you want a well-balanced planter. And right away, your planter might not look well-balanced, but just remember, it kind of takes time for it to kind of grow into itself. So yeah, that's just kind of a few tips when choosing plants for the planters. So I'm gonna go outside and get started.